Hello my loyal companions, welcome back to the channel and to another episode of Rogue Revealed, the series where I take you through everything you need to know about Rogue Company. This video today is for you newer players and I want to give you an idea of who the best rogues are to play when you're just starting out in Rogue Company. I'm going to go from the easiest rogue I think it is to play and pick up first to the hardest rogue I think it is to pick up. If you do go on to enjoy this video, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, but for now, let's get into it. So in trying to calculate which rogue is the easiest and which is the hardest, I basically took three things into account. The first being their weapons, so this is looking at their weapon management, how good their weapons are at the different ranges, how versatile they are, and how much damage they actually put out compared to the recoil they require. Also, I looked at the abilities, so every rogue has a unique ability, and I wanted to figure out which the easiest to use, which make the most sense and easy for these newer players, compared to which ones are a bit more difficult and require a bit more skill to execute properly. And then the final thing I wanted to look at was teamwork, because when you do jump into Rogue Company for the first time, or even when you get really good at the game, teamwork is one of the hardest elements to master. So rogues who are better in sort of solo play and who are better can carry like 1v2 fights or more, they're the rogues that are going to be slightly easier for you newer players to learn because you're less reliant on your team and what they're doing. With all that being said, this video is here to explain which rogues have the lowest floor, so the lowest entry level to play them, not which rogues have the highest ceiling, so are the best to play. Just because a rogue is easy to get into doesn't mean they don't have just as much impact for these really good players as well. If your favorite rogue is on the bottom of the list in terms of easiness, that doesn't mean that they're not good rogues. That video will be coming later, but just it shows newer players which rogues are probably the best to start learning the basic mechanics of the game with. With all that being said, from easiest to hardest, let's get into the first rogue I think who is the easiest. So through my calculations and over 9 days worth of in-game time, I've calculated that Shark is the easiest rogue for newer players to pick up. The bars you see next to weapons, abilities and team play is from 1 to 5, so 2 of which Shark has overall throughout all 3 categories, shows that he's actually pretty consistent and his weapons, his ability and his team element aren't that hard to get into. His weapons are very good, both of them are fairly consistent and have good recoil management with good damage. His ability to overheal is very simple to use, very hard to master, but very simple to use initially to get an additional 75 health or just get an initial self-revive off. And in terms of his team play, he's a very self-reliant rogue. He doesn't necessarily need a team behind him. He can make plays on his own, or he can be there to support the team by being this frontliner going in with the additional health. It doesn't really matter, but either way, Shaq helps you learn the basic mechanics of the game really well and is very forgiving with his additional health from his ability and very kind recoil-friendly weapons. His biggest advantage is this self-reliance, but his biggest disadvantage is that it's not always the easiest to get the self-revive off because enemies tend to thirst you, and in that element you kind of do need your team to be supportive there. Go on to the next rogue I think is easiest to play for newer players, and one I would definitely recommend you all picking up is Ronin. Now, Ronin's weapons are very versatile. She has a good AR for mid, short, and maybe even sometimes longer ranges if you can control that recoil, and her SMG is an absolute monster at close range. Her ability is where she becomes a little bit more difficult to use because to use it correctly, whether you're using it offensively or defensively, you kind of have to know a little bit of map knowledge there. But not really. At the end of the day, it is just a thrown projectile explosive, so it isn't that hard to sort of get the grasp of that way. And if you just throw it on the ground next to you to guard a flank, that's a very simple way of using it. Obviously, there are much more advanced ways of using it, but in terms of base entry level, it's not that hard. And in terms of team play, again, she can be very self-reliant or she can work really well as a team. It's really a mix of both, but you don't need your team to play well on Ronin. Her biggest advantage is her versatile kit, the fact she can do so much and you can really pick and choose, and that's why she's so good for newer players, because you kind of get a feel of every aspect of the game. You're not just playing a close range rogue, you can play a mid to long range rogue as well just by playing Ronin. Her biggest disadvantage is that her perks are pretty useless, honestly. She could probably get a bit of a tweak with her perks to make them a bit more useful to her and her kit, but it does mean you can upgrade her weapons instead and focus on your gunplay, which I would recommend for newer players to focus on first. Gunplay in the third-person perspective of this game is much more important than perks when you start to get into it for the first time. Now coming in third is going to be Lancer, and this just goes to show how, although they're quite easy to play on this list for newer players, it doesn't mean they don't have good value in high level play, as I run Lancer in competitive play fairly often now. Lance's weapons are very good for her particular playstyle with the close range SMG and shotgun. Her ability is very simple to use. You press your bumpers, press your ability button, and then you run really fast and quiet. But her team play aspect is basically non-existent as well. She's very, very solo orientated with very little impact from the team being needed to help her succeed in her role, which goes into her biggest advantage, which is her flanking ability. Her biggest disadvantage, though, is the roll reload mechanic, I think, for newer players. It's such a powerful ability, but newer players need to get used to dodge rolling normally in the game. If you're uncomfortable dodge rolling, you're missing a massive part of what Lancer is, because she can dodge roll to reload her weapon, which is a mechanic no other rogue has and is so, so good. She didn't get easiest rogue on this list for that reason, that newer players are not generally comfortable with the dodge roll mechanic, and that is such an important part of Lancer's kit that I felt like it had to be weighed up in. Going on to the fourth rogue is going to be Scorch. Now, Scorch's weapons become a little bit more difficult to handle as they are very, very much built for these closer range fights. Her SMG has a lot of recoil when you go past about the 20-meter range, and her shotgun is really only good for very, very up-close fights. Her ability is very simple to use. You press your bumpers and you basically gain additional damage when you shoot people. It's very, very simple if you want to put it bluntly. But her team play aspect is slightly higher because when you do not have your ability, you're very, very useless. And this is her biggest disadvantage, is that when you don't have that ability, she's not as good as many other rogues. I would much rather have a Ronin who has the same SMG in a situation if Scorch doesn't have her ability. However, when you do have her ability, she becomes probably one of the best 1v1 rogues in the game, and that is her biggest advantage. Coming in number 5 spot is going to be Saint, whose Mamba weapon is very, very forgiving. It's one of the best DMRs, and his Mark IV assault rifle, the scoped assault rifle, is very good in its own right as well. Originally, Saint was slightly higher up on this list in terms of difficulty to play, but it was pointed out to me by my teammate Whooped that a lot of people coming into this game for the first time, these newer players that this video is intended towards, are used to FPS shooters, and the scoped aspect of the Mark IV rifle will become very familiar to them, and that's why it's actually slightly easier for you newer players. If you're looking for a scoped rifle, maybe look at playing Saint for a little bit. His ability is probably the most simple to use. You press your bumper whenever you see a teammate down, and then it will send out a drone to revive them. The only issue is, and this is where it feeds into his team play, Saint is built around this drone and this revive. If you can't get it off and your teammates aren't in a position to help you get it off, you're basically useless. Yes, his guns are good, but realistically anyone can shoot in this game. What makes Saint is his revive medic abilities, and without that drone and without your team being there to go down in the correct position for the drone to be off or to help you cover someone who's being revived, he's very, very team play orientated, and that is a big disadvantage for you newer players. His biggest advantage, of course, is that he is the only healer in the game, which is a fantastic and important role. His biggest disadvantage is that the enemies do tend, particularly when you're new to the game, to thirst the kills, which means your revive drone, as I said, is basically useless. Coming in at number 6 is going to be Anvil, whose weapons are very, very solid, particularly that LMG, which is the best, highest time to kill AR/LMG in the game. With a max cap of 90 rounds on that LMG, it's very, very forgiving. You can really learn to get your shot on point and adjust for that recoil with Anvil's weapon, which is great for new players. His ability can be very useful at blocking different paths, which is his biggest advantage in the game currently that I see, is to block off different pathing routes. But the only real issue is that finding the correct placement for it can be a bit difficult, particularly if you're new to the map, you don't have much map knowledge. He isn't super team play orientated. You kind of do your thing, set up your wall, set up your LMG and try and kill people that way. He doesn't rely a lot on his team to do much, as he can do quite a bit by himself. Coming in at number 7 is one of my favourite rogues, and that is Dima. His weapons are very similar to Saint, where he has an assault rifle unscoped, but he also has the Mamba, which are very, very good weapons. His ability is where it becomes slightly harder to use properly. It is a grenade launcher that shoots a cluster grenade at a position, but actually figuring out how this bounces and how the grenade and the cluster splits up is quite difficult. That being said, he actually doesn't have to be too team play orientated. He can frag out pretty well by himself. His biggest advantage is that he has this massive AoE damage with his different explosives. His biggest disadvantage is that it can be difficult to land and time properly that ability. Dallas then comes in at number 8, whose weapons are built for long range with high recoil, so they are a bit less user-friendly for you newer players who are just getting used to the third-person perspective and shooting within this game. His ability, though, is very simple with the reveal that refreshes when he gets downs, which is fantastic. And his team play is fairly average. He does kind of require his team to be able to do a lot, but you do see some Dallas's frag out. But for you newer players, you kind of do want to be sticking around your team and using your ability to help the team, which means he's not super friendly for you guys. Coming at number 9 is Phantom. This one took a lot of thought. So now a lot of people will say that Phantom with her sniper is actually quite easy to use, particularly if you're coming from a first-person shooter. But the reason I argue otherwise and why she's probably not the best for newer players to go, and this also goes off experience with newer players going onto Phantom very early and getting absolutely rolled, is because you don't know enough about the game to actually use her and capitalize on her effectively. Phantom is there to get really clutch picks on enemies that miss position or who are not using their third-person peek correctly. Therefore, you need to understand that third-person peek. You need to understand the angles, understand all the elements of the game before you can really use Phantom properly. Yes, you might be able to ding out a headshot, which, to be fair, is one of the harder things to do in the game anyway because of how accurate you're going to have to be. But you need to understand the core elements of the game to use her effectively. Her ability is very simple to use though. You just throw out a smoke grenade, it just you have to figure out where is the best angle sometimes, and that will come with map knowledge. But her team play is very reliant because if you do not succeed in hitting your shots on Phantom, you are very useless, and then you fully require your team to help you in any situation. Number 10 then is going to be Talon, whose weapons are actually fantastic. The LMPX is a really, really good SMG, and the DMR isn't the best DMR, but it is okay, really, if you're trying to compare it to some assault rifles, as long as you can hit those shots. His ability is where he becomes quite difficult to use, though, properly. He throws out his sensor dart and reveals an area, which in itself isn't too bad if you're trying to solo frag. You know, you just throw it out in front of you and try and kill whoever's there, but the actual part that I think of his ability that is difficult is using the passive mag gloves, as you tend to pick up things accidentally by trying to reload if it's mapped to the same button, and it can be a bit clunky to get used to, and the different angles you have to be at to reclaim items. He is, again, sort of averagely team orientated. He's great with his team. He's kind of okay by himself as well. It just sort of depends on the playstyle. But really it's that ability that makes him unique. His biggest advantage is that constant reveal you have with the reclaim of your dart. His biggest disadvantage, as I said, is that correct use of that ability. Coming in at number 11 is going to be Trench, whose weapons are very similar to Dallas in terms of how difficult they are to control. He also has the very high-powered assault rifle and then a DMR to go with it. So again, long range and recoil control make his weapons quite difficult to use. His ability is an average ability to use. Realistically, you throw it down, you create a slow area with the barbed wire, but to then capitalize on that and use it effectively in the correct spaces is where it becomes a little bit more difficult. He, though, himself is really not built to solo carry. He has good guns, but they're not really good enough compared to a lot of the other rogues who have a lot of utility to help them succeed in killing. Trench's abilities are for defense, which means he's quite team reliant to help them pick up the slack that he is putting out. His biggest advantage is the pure anti-breach, especially with the active protection unit, the trophy system, to stop grenades coming in. Coming in then in the penultimate position, number 12, is Vi. Vi's weapons are not that difficult to use. They are pretty much built for close range, and the AR is not very good, but the shotgun can be amazing, and the pistol, the way I use it and the combo I use, is actually really effective. Her ability is what makes her really, really difficult to use, though. Her throwing out these poisons in the cluster, creating a lot of zone control, is a phenomenal ability, but to place them correctly and to use them right is super, super hard. For newer players, this is going to be the biggest challenge for you, to get the angle right, to get the positioning right, to have the map knowledge, to know where they go, to cover the flanks as well. It's very, very difficult, and she's not the most user-friendly for you newer players. And in that respect, she's also quite team reliant in the fact that she's not there to solo frag, she's there to zone control for her team, so you can all work together. She's a crowd control, team orientated rogue, not great for newer players. In a similar vein, we're taking on to who I think is the hardest rogue to play for newer players, and that is going to be Glitch. Whilst his weapons are very, very good, similar to Talon's, he has the best SMG and then a pretty good shotgun as well. It's where his ability comes in that makes him so difficult to use. His hacking ability to get it right and to use it properly and to hack the right things is so, so hard. It takes people a lot of time on Glitch to learn this properly, to learn what they're trying to hack, and it has so much game knowledge involved. The positioning on the map knowledge to know exactly where you want to be to get the right distance to hack these items, knowing what to hack and what everything does, knowing when to wait to hack, when to hold it, when to use it. These are all very difficult things, and newer players should learn the basic mechanics first and then work their way up to someone like Glitch. In the same vein, he's very team orientated as well, because his ability requires your team to one, cover you while you're using it, but then also capitalize on the breach that he provides using the hack, to capitalize on it and win the game for the team. His biggest advantage is that he can completely disable the abilities of every single rogue in the game and all their different utility as well, which is phenomenal. Although his biggest disadvantage is that his ability is so hard to use effectively. Okay then guys, that's going to take us to the end of the video. I do hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And you can also come follow me on twitch.tv/RadtharGaming to see live game commentaries and guides, including competitive gameplay and tournaments. All the links are going to be in the description below. Other than that, I hope you have a fantastic day, and remember, be loyal, be brave, be relentless, and I'll see you in the next video.